In our second podcast episode, ahead of the Impact Management Reporting Guideline launch hosted by Nation Builder, we have a chat to Desigan Chetty, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Property Point, about bridging the partnership divide through effective progress reporting. You're listening to our social newscast with me, Sam Marshall, brought to you by www.socialtv.co.za. Desigan, thank you very much for giving us your time. Let's start with unpacking the theme of this discussion, bridging the partnership divide through effective progress reporting. What does that mean?
So thanks, Sam. Thanks for the question. I think in the context that we find ourselves in, partnerships are so vital at this point in time. And if we are to achieve similar end goals as organizations within the social space, whether we are social investors or implementation partners, we really need to ensure that there's a strong sense around partnership and that we are aligned to some of these common objectives. And whether that be creating jobs or creating small businesses or ensuring access to effective healthcare, given the current COVID scenario, it's really ensuring that we are able to collaborate within a value chain and to make sure that we understand everyone's perspectives and where we are coming from. I think there's been no better time now for us to foster a spirit of collaboration. And if I link this to where the reporting comes in, I think through that reporting framework, we would need to ensure that everyone is, number one, meeting their objectives that they are after, but secondly, they have a clear understanding of what they are able to deliver and the value that they bring to this overall partnership process. So I really think that the reporting framework that's been developed by Nation Builder is a key tool to be able to foster effective partnership, especially during these trying times.
And that perfectly segues into our next question, because what are some of the aspects one needs to consider around partnerships? And upon reflecting, what are some of the issues you wish you brought up in that initial partnership discussions?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's such a great question in terms of consideration. And if one looks back around certain partnerships, you always wish that you would have approached things differently or tried to see the other person's perspective. And I think if I bring it back home to partnership discussions that I've been involved in, certainly during this time, it was to have that sense of empathy up front and a more firmer understanding of what the elements of the partnership were or what the intended outcomes were likely to be. So almost to steer the discussion in a way where you have a shared vision and a shared understanding of what kind of objectives you want to achieve together, and then almost setting in place that practical approach to be able to achieve that. Timeframes are very important, and often that's where I think potential partners don't always align in terms of expectations of time frame. So I think if that's clearly set out in the initial stages and you are clear around what those activities are, then those for me are recipes for a successful partnership and a sustainable partnership, may I add, as you move forward in the relationship.
Timing is such a critical component with some of these reports, and one would argue that Nation Builder, Property Point being part of the steering committee, have almost hit this spot on. This report, and I had an interview with Kerry Lee and Hlengiwe from Nation Builder, and we talked about the timeline of this report. It took 18 months to develop, but it started in actual fact 6 months before COVID started. Just talk to me about how do you reflect on the value of this report in the time of COVID?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I think, the timing could not have been better. This was obviously a long-term project, but I think the timing was so spot on in the context of, where we found ourselves 6 months later in the middle of a global pandemic. And I think, during this period, it really highlighted the relevance of social organizations. I think we all had an appreciation of some of the general challenges that the world has been through, the ability to meet some of the social objectives, and specifically I'm referring to the Sustainable Development Goals, issues around gender equality, issues around inequality, access to basic services. I think all of these things were relevant pre the pandemic. But once the pandemic happened, it certainly illuminated a lot of these challenges. And I think it became so important for social organizations almost to get back to the drawing board. Whether you are looking at applying for funding for developmental initiatives from certain funders or international organizations, one really needed to have a guideline in place around impact. And how do you measure this impact? And what are some of the tangible outcomes you want to achieve, given this very limited pool of funding that suddenly became available in the world for these social initiatives, whether it was for health or for retail, etc. Those were some of the more important sectors during this time. So I certainly believe that it was immensely valuable for nation builders to have put this framework forward, because I think as social organizations started reinventing themselves in many ways to be able to, number one, take advantage of these opportunities in the market now, which sort of squarely fell into the area of focus, it was also to ensure that should you have received this funding or assistance, that there were going to be measurable outcomes and tangible benefits that were going to, benefit society in a period where those benefits almost had to be seen immediately. And I think we know with impact, sometimes you want to be able to see impact in a longer term. You can implement something now, but you'll really only see the impact of that in 6 to 9 months, as an example. So I think the framework really helped to provide a level of guidance, a level of focus, and a level of structure for a lot of these organizations to now kind of plan their next in terms of how they tackle the opportunities in the market. And I think the reality was also that we knew that certain organizations, weren't necessarily achieving their mandates and doing it in a very impactful way. So I think that, in terms of the reporting guidelines, it would have also ensured that those organizations now align to this very structured way of achieving sustainable outcomes and outcomes that were to benefit, respective societies.
And outcomes is almost the underlying buzzword, because that's really when you talk about the importance of impact reporting, when you talk about standardization of measurements, when you talk about quantifiable data, that you're saying we are actually moving away from this very maverick, I'll do it my way, you do it your way. What's the importance of impact reporting in terms of your organization, and what are some of the lessons, Desigan, that you've learned or the team have learned?
Yeah, thanks, Chetty. I think it's so fundamentally important. And here again, it's one of those areas that have been illuminated. People speak about impact, but don't really have an appreciation of the process that one needs to take. So from a property point perspective, impact is fundamental and central to what we do as an organization. And our approach is to really look at how one implements this theory of change. So it's starting with, what kind of impact do we want to achieve, and then working back to ensure that we have the right level of activities and outcomes in place. And I think in saying that, we also want to be able to ensure that our focus is outcomes-based and we have a results-orientated focus. And I think that helps to keep organizations like us accountable, but also our funding partners accountable, as well as the small businesses that we work with accountable around what we need to achieve collectively. So I think in terms of some of the lessons learned, from our side. I can share a couple of lessons with you. Something important for us is to make sure that the businesses that we work with should be at the center of our impact management strategy and approach. It's so important to have that human-centric approach and understand the people for whom you are solving those particular problems. I think if you don't do that effectively, you have fundamentally missed the boat. The second lesson that we've learned is always to ensure that your impact strategy is reiterative and it is agile to adapt to what is happening to in the market, and to be responsive again, to the needs of the people that you are assisting. So that becomes fundamentally important. The impact management approach should certainly be underpinned by a theory of change, as I spoke to earlier on, and you really need to ensure that you have that implementation oversight of that process in place to ensure that you are kept accountable and can derive those successful outcomes. I think it's also important to benchmark against global best practices, so to keep in line with what is happening out there and to make sure that you are aligning to the best practices. So, for example, with Property Point, we align to the DCED, that's the Donor Community of Enterprise Development, and their global best practice around impact management. I think embracing technology during this period has been critical, and I think we really see that in order to collect effective data and efficient data, that one needs to embrace technology. And here again, I think adoption of technology has been accelerated during the time of the pandemic. So embracing technology becomes important. And then I think the last lesson that we've learned is really to ensure that you are not afraid to share your impact story and to provide an overview of the journey that you've been through, that your beneficiaries have been through, because I think it's only through sharing the impact story that you are really able to influence other people, and for other people to have a better appreciation of the process that you've been through and understanding the needs of those beneficiaries. So you almost want your audience to step into the shoes of the beneficiary. And I think, really that is the beauty of storytelling. And those are some of the key lessons learned from Property Point.
This has been incredibly insightful, Desigan. Final question from me. Impact measurement framework and the challenges Property Point has experienced, especially in assisting organizations to put together an impact framework.
Yeah, so I think really a great question, because I think it goes to the point of saying that in implementing a measurement framework, one needs to have a long-term view of implementation and certainly the impact as a result of that implementation. So I think often one of the challenges experienced is that, organizations want to achieve instant gratification. So you want to be able to implement something and see the impact of that immediately. And the reality is that when we look at impact management and impact measurement, it's really a process of change. And I think with any process of change, you need to allow the process to take time and to almost, ventilate, if I could use that term, in terms of seeing the real impact and seeing the real results of interventions. So I think for me, and through Property Point, what we've seen is that often, organizations want to achieve their objectives. They want to achieve it in the shortest possible time. But if you rush it, you have the resultant effect of not ensuring sustainability. So I think something that is important is to ensure that, from an investor perspective, if one is investing in certain social initiatives, as an example, that you do so with the objective of doing it over a longer term and actually spending the time to determine ultimately what impact you want to achieve. What systemic impact do you want to achieve? I think sometimes we are so focused on the shorter term outputs and outcomes that we lose sight of the broader impact that we want to change in society. And I think there needs to be an appreciation, Shane, that sometimes it takes time to achieve this. But I think for me, this is where the theory of change approach really helps to focus oneself in really charting this way forward. And of course, you will have some quick wins in between, which you'll celebrate and which you'll articulate in terms of your impact story. But it's really to ensure that in the future, as you want to achieve sustainability, that the timing is a factor of that. So it really is to ensure that as part of your framework, you are realistic around the timeframes that you set, and that you don't have a short-termism a view on achieving some of these broader systemic impacts that you want to achieve in the longer term.
Desigan, thank you very much for your time and for your insight.
Thank you so much, Shane, and thanks once again to the Nation Builder team for allowing us to share some of our experiences. So thank you very much on behalf of the Property Point program as well.
Thank you, sir. Have a great weekend.
Okay. All right, cool. Thanks so much, Shane. I hope that was fine.
No, that was brilliant. It was brilliant. Thank you. It was really insightful.
Okay.
It came across well.
Okay. No, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Cool.
Have a good weekend.